family. This is Heather, and I have Karen with me, and we are just going to do a follow-up from our Mother's Day message where I asked Karen some questions, and we actually have some more questions that we're going to get to in just a moment. But first, let's start with scripture. Let's do John 19:26 through 27. When Jesus saw his mother standing there beside the disciple he loved, he said to her, "Dear woman, here is your son." And he said to his disciple, "Here is your mother." And from then on, this disciple took her into his home. And I know we talked about that on Mother's Day, but like I said, we had some questions come in, and I'm just going to start with those questions.
Sounds good.
The first question is, and this is for you, Karen, as a new step parent, I struggle with imposter syndrome. I'm always feeling like I'm the outsider trying to take someone else's place. What can I overdo to overcome that feeling?
Yeah, so that is definitely a feeling that is fairly typical for a step parent. From other step parents that I've talked with, it's something that I experienced, not even just as a new step parent, but throughout the marriage and as the kids were getting older, feeling like an outsider, feeling like an imposter. But for me, that was one of the first things that we really wanted to make sure the kids understood. So we had those conversations between Steve and myself first, and then with the kids about that I was not replacing their mother, that I wasn't taking the place of anybody. But the truth is, you are a parent, you're an adult in the household, and so you do need to be a parent. I think probably one of the biggest advice that I can give is to be yourself. Don't try and be an imposter. Just be yourself. If you have children of your own, treat the children as you would your own or as you do your own, so they don't feel like you're trying to take the place of their parent, but they see that you are treating them just like one of their own. And I think, imposter syndrome is something that we experience not even just as a parent, but in our work worlds. And I think the other thing we need to remember is that we're not given manuals as parents. And so at times we are feeling like, even of parents of our own children, we can feel like imposters sometimes because it's a struggle. It can be a real struggle. I think Heather, you even mentioned that, like, there are times that with your own children that it's just like, wow, this is tough. And so sometimes with children that you did not give birth to, or family members that aren't blood, it can be a struggle. But I think we just need to realize that that can be the case with any family in any situation.
For me, I was thinking about, as you were talking about imposter. I was thinking about DNA. So I'm a DNA scientist, if you all don't know. And one of the things with DNA is that it's unique to everybody. And so there is no imposter. God made us all different. We all have different DNA. So really, there is no imposter. So to that relationship, you can bring something different that maybe the biological, mother or father
Yeah,
don't have. You're an unique individual, so you don't ever have to feel like you're an imposter because you're a unique person. So
I
just
love that.
just
That's a
just
great
throw
way.
just
Yes,
throwing that in there. Brought my science mind into this for a moment.
I
So
love that. But you actually brought to mind an example of a situation with a friend of mine that had stepchildren. And she said she struggled because her daughter loved to go shopping, but that wasn't her biological mother's thing, was not to go shopping. but her stepmother loved to go shopping. So it actually took the pressure off of her to have to do that with her daughter when she did not enjoy it. But then she got to do other things with her daughter that they did have in common and that she enjoyed doing. So I think, yes, to your point, there are things that are unique to each of us. And so a lot of times we should just embrace what we do have in common and what we don't have in common.
Yeah, I
Okay.
love that. That's really good. Moving on to the second question. I feel like my spouse always takes sides with her kids. How can I express that to her without causing a big argument?
Wow.
Ooh.
Yeah. Yeah. That's very real too within the marriage. I think again, that can be in a marriage within two parents with their own children, right? It doesn't have to
Yeah.
just involve stepchildren, but it can be extra tough because you're already feeling like an outsider. And then if one of the spouses is siding with their children, it makes you feel even more of an outsider. And so the biggest thing is going to have to bite the bullet and take the chance that there could be an argument, but you have to address the situation. But come at it from a place of good intentions, from a place of love, and don't be accusatory, but have some specifics, instances, and don't generalize. You always do this, or you never do this. So have some specifics, and sit down, have open dialogue. That means asking questions and then listening. I think too often we make assumptions. So just ask some questions like, when you said this or when you did this, is this what you intended? This is how I took it. And so that way it shows how you took it, but that may not have been the intent at all. So, and I think sometimes we might take things, this is from my own experience, that I've done, but take things the wrong way because we were already feeling like an outsider and defensive. So
Mm.
sometimes when we're coming at it from that, we don't always have the right mindset when those situations occur. So
That
I can tell
that's
you from,
really good because that kind of sounds like you have related to the person that asked this question a little bit, but I think the big thing that you're saying is communication. And with that, let me ask a little follow-up question. So if that happens, do you communicate that immediately or do you just wait and see if it's kind of a pattern?
um, for me, and I'm not a counselor, I'm not an expert, but for me, it was better if I addressed it fairly soon, not necessarily in front of the kids, right? Especially if you felt like it was going to be a big argument. Um, but it's also, I think, okay as parents to have arguments, not to go off on a tangent, but it's also okay to have arguments in front of your children because then they see that there is
Yep.
communication, to your point, Heather, right? Um, Whereas if you don't address it and they don't see that you discuss things, then that's where I think those walls start to get thicker
Yep.
and thicker and
Yep.
wider and wider. So,
And I think to that point, you're teaching your kids how to communicate with one another. Adonis and I will have arguments, and the kids, I will say, as they got older, they're like, "Oh no, are you getting divorced?" And I was like, "What? Where does that come from? Where are you getting that from?" And they said, "Because you were fighting, and or you were arguing." And I said, "But." You and Carrington argue, Grayson and Carrington. So Grayson said it. And I said, so you and Carrington argue. And I said, but you love her, right? And he's like, yeah, of course I do. So even, as siblings to be like, that was just such a concept to him where he was like, oh, okay. He's like, yeah, we fight, but at the end of the day, I love my sister. So I think it's normal when you have just human beings together, it's going to happen where you're going to get into arguments, you're going to get
Yes.
into some fights. So it's just communicating and working through that. It's not fighting or yelling, it's just
Yeah.
arguments. And sometimes those have to be worked through. So that's
Yes.
really good.
Yeah.
Um,
Great.
so I know you had some